We're in Unit 4, and the first topic under Unit 4 is secondary dominants, which is it's a huge topic because it shows up all the time. Let me start with tonicization, that word, because secondary dominants are a way to tonicize. To tonicize means to make something that's not tonic for the moment. In other words, you've got a scale degree, say it's 3, anything other than scale degree 1, and you want to treat that scale degree 3 as if it were tonic, and that means you need to provide it with its leading tone. So it means to tonicize means to treat something that's not tonic as if it were. There's one spot in the scale that's not going to work, both in major and minor. If you've got scale degree 7 and you try and tonicize it, you're not going to have much success because scale degree 7 is the leading tone, and you think of the triad up there. You could alter it, I guess, and change the chord quality, but what you're going to get if you just stick with the key signature is a diminished 7. So 7 diminished. And you can give it its leading tone, but it's never going to sound like tonic, however hard you might work. In minor, there's another option, that's the 2 chord. It also is diminished, and it's just never going to sound like tonic, no matter how hard you work. Now, tonicization includes a whole range of different kinds of phenomena. So secondary dominant is at one end of the spectrum. It's just a momentary thing. It doesn't necessarily take up a whole lot of time. It involves a chord. I guess we could move a little bit further back and say, if I've got just say a passing chromatic note that sounds like a leading tone, that's a little taste of tonicization, but it's not very significant. If we move away from individual notes and individual chords, secondary dominant, secondary leading tone chords, and we move way at the other end of the spectrum, we've got modulation. And that's tonicization, making something that's not tonic sound as if it were, but on a grand scale. So we've made the listener buy into a new tonic for some span of time. And so you can see that modulation is way over here on that spectrum, and secondary dominants are at the other end, close to the other end. Okay, now secondary dominants in particular. So a secondary dominant is a dominant of something. So not the dominant, but any other. Here's a definition off this sheet. A chord that serves as the dominant of a chord other than the tonic. That works well. Now, it's not always secondary dominants, but secondary leading tone chords. They too serve a dominant function, but we want to distinguish between 5 of something and 7 of something. Now that might be 7 diminished 7 of something, but it can't just be 7 diminished usually, because diminished chords don't happen in root position. Now, it is interesting though that once in a while you'll see 7 diminished of something. That's the one, really the one exception. So in the main key, you don't want to use 7 diminished. You can use 7 diminished 6, you can use 7 diminished 7, or any inversion of 7 diminished 7, but that diminished chord does not happen very frequently at all. I mean, it's super, super rare in the key. Now, it happens a little more frequently that you'll get 7 diminished root position as a secondary chord. So just so you know, you may encounter that. Another word to know is applied chord. So you can talk of secondary chords. That can be a little bit confusing because if we talk of primary chords as 1, 5, and 4, as some textbooks do, then any other diatonic chord is going to be a secondary chord. So, that's a little bit confusing. But for most people, secondary chords are those that are secondary dominants, secondary leading tone chords. They're a dominant or a 7 of something other than the tonic. That's the normal definition of that. Another word that we use synonymously, though, is this word I just mentioned, applied. So we can say this is an applied dominant. In other words, you've taken the dominant principle and you've applied it to a new place, a new scale degree. You've taken the 7 diminished chord and you've taken it from its normal environs and you've moved it to a new place in the scale and said, okay, I'm going to apply it to, say, scale degree 4 or what have you. So applied chords. And a lot of textbooks use both. Some use one, some use the other. good to know them both. Applied chords and secondary chords it's the same concept, just two different words for it. The first thing I want to talk about is analysis. How do you find them fast? And the speediest way to do it is to look for accidentals. This isn't going to work with every single one because some are diatonic to the key. Say, if you're in minor and you're tonicizing 3, so let's say we're going to use 5 of 3. Think of that chord that is 5 of 3, say in C minor. If you're in C minor, 3 is E flat. Well, 7 is 5. So think of that. If you're in E flat, what is the 5 in that key? It's B flat. Now put that in terms of C, and you see you've got a chord, B flat D F, that fits the key. So there you're not going to need an accidental to make this happen. And that's good to remember that one. 5 of 3 is 7 in a minor key. But all the rest of them, I'm probably forgetting one other, there's probably another exception there, but generally speaking, if you see a secondary dominant, it's going to need a leading tone. And barring that, it may need a chordal seventh that's borrowed from, or not borrowed, but taken from another context. So you'll see an accidental to create that leading tone. You'll see an accidental to create that chordal seventh. Okay, so here's the main principle. If you see an accidental that raises a note, so it could be that it normally would be a note that bears a flat, and you've got a natural on it, or it could be that you have to sharpen a note that's already natural. Whatever raises it a half step, that accidental is usually indicating a leading tone. The other principle is that if you see a note lowered in a secondary dominant situation, it's probably the chordal seventh. So here are 2 rules of thumb regarding accidentals. Again, the context here is analysis. You see an accidental. Number 1, suspect a raised note of being a leading tone. Number 2, suspect a lower note of being a chordal seventh. When we get into mixture, we're going to have other notes that are lowered, but they're lowered for other reasons. So it really has to do with this context right here, and later we'll add other possibilities to it. And then we'll have to suspect lowered notes of either being mixture or the result of lowering a chordal seventh in a secondary dominant. So it'll be a little more complex a little later, but for the time being, it's just going to be these 2 principles that I want you to remember. The main one is if you've got a raised note, you suspect it being a leading tone. It's kind of like when you see the tattoo, you know what gang they belong to or whatever. You see that sharp, and that's the tattoo, that's the mark, that's the badge. Or let's put it on the other side of the law. How about the sheriff always wears his badge in those westerns? You know, you've always got the badge there. The leading tone wears some kind of accidental that raises, and when you see that badge, you go, "Oh, okay. I think I know what this is." All right. So let's take a couple examples now.